with the one and only John Romano from the Tampa Bay Times to talk the Rays Stadium saga, the latest of what is going on there. John, what's going on, buddy? How are you? You're muted, buddy. You're muted. You're muted. Sorry. Oh. We'll get you in there. There we go.
How about that?
how are you, John? Sorry.
I'm doing well. I thought we were talking wrestling. Do we have to do Rays Stadium? Is that the necessity here?
Yeah, I get. Yeah. Well, listen. Who's your favorite wrestler of all time, John?
Oh God, I haven't watched wrestling since the 70s. I'd have to go with Dusty Rhodes or something like that. It's been a while for me.
The American Dream. Yeah, man. It's one of those things. It's funny because my dad, big baseball, he played baseball in college, played basketball in college, big sports guy, never liked wrestling. But me, I just saw it when I couldn't even speak English. I couldn't speak at all. And I just got hooked on the wrestling, and I watch it just as much as I watch anything else. And anytime like I can tie it in, I do it because I think you're similar in the way of like, you look at all the sports and you kind of look at some of the underlying stories, right? And you look at some of the things that make people fall in love with the sports or the entertainment. And just, it's something that it's like a bug, man. I can't scratch it off of me. It's insane. But yeah,
it was a big thing for us when we were kids. I mean, Gordon Soley, championship wrestling from Florida on Channel 44. I mean, that was must-see TV when I was growing up as a kid.
Did you ever go to the Armory?
Never went to the Armory. Went to some matches at the old Bayfront Center in downtown St. Petersburg.
Yeah, I went to it was the last wrestling show at the Armory, and this was like, God, 10 years ago or so. And I was invited as a special guest, and it was just all the old timers sitting there. B. Brian Blair and the whole crew. Gerald Briscoe was there, and they were like, "Son, you know you're wrestling." I go, "You got to learn history. If you don't learn history, you'll be condemned to repeat it." And they're like, "Even in wrestling?" I said, "Even in wrestling, because you know when the stories are coming." One story I don't know if we should have seen coming or not seen coming. This whole Rays Stadium saga, John. It's probably right out of a WWE storyline. With, you don't know who the transparent people are, you don't know who's telling the truth. And I love your recent article on it, because as much as the Rays, you want to say you want to keep it here, I mean, I just find it very weird, John, because when I worked at iHeart for 10 years, the Countdown opening day was a show every single year was to grow the interest of the local team here. Chris Archer came to the radio station. Kevin Kiermaier came to the radio station. Now, the big takeaway from this year is throwing darts at the St. Pete City Council and the Pinellas County Commission. Like, where are we at right here? I feel like I'm just kind of stuck, in a canoe without a paddle in Lake Tampa Bay Rays right now.
Yeah, I mean, the Rays, I understand they have a lot of anger. They have a lot of frustration with the way things have gone down. But it just seems like over the last 6 weeks or so that instead of looking for solutions, they just want to keep, poking the bear, saying this is why we're in this mess to begin with. They just really haven't come out and said exactly what it is they want, other than the fact that they want more money out of the county and the city, because they've lost money due to so many different factors in terms of the hurricanes. That they're not going to be at Tropicana Field, so their revenues are not going to be as high. There was the 49-day delay while the Pinellas County Commission was not approving the bonds right away, which caused the Rays to stop the production and having people move into town to begin the redevelopment. There's just so many moving pieces here, but it just seems like we're at a point where everybody just wants to point fingers instead of coming up with a solution.
What are they so angry about? Like, that's my whole big thing. Like, I've read through so many of the different articles, and we've had Colleen write on a bunch of times to kind of talk through everything, and Topper. And I just don't know, like, what are they so angry about? Like, if there's a disagreement, that's one thing. But I mean, it just seems like the Pinellas County Commission and the St. Pete City Council, like, they voted on, they want this to happen. So it doesn't seem like they're the ones that aren't being transparent or not trying to work through this. I just wonder, where is this anger coming from?
Well, it starts mostly with the Pinellas County Commission. They, up until the past week, the Rays seem to have had a really good relationship with the city. They were dealing well with Mayor Welch. They were dealing pretty well with most of the city council folks. They sort of felt like those people had gone to the wall for them in terms of getting as much as they could to help them. The problem all begins with the Pinellas County Commission meeting back in late October. And the commissioners, they're rewriting history a little bit over the last couple of months. They're saying, well, we went through hurricanes and we had to take a pause. We had to reassess. That really wasn't the reason that they delayed the bond vote. At that time, Chris Latvala was pushing the idea of the Rays playing temporarily in Clearwater instead of Tampa, which hadn't been announced yet, but it seemed to be moving in that direction. And that's the only thing that was brought up in that commission meeting, was they should be playing in Clearwater instead of Tampa. And if they're not going to be partners with us, then we're not going to approve this bond. That's where the whole thing began. It upended everything that the Rays were planning in terms of what they were doing with Heinz, the Heinz Corporation. They had people moving in from all over the country to begin this whole process of redeveloping the land, not just the stadium, but the land itself. And I think the Pinellas County Commission at some point realized we're about to be blamed here for mucking up this entire $6.5 billion redevelopment deal. So by early December, two of the commissioners had reversed themselves in terms of what they voted for in the summertime and even what they voted for in October, and said, yes, let's go ahead with the bond votes. So once that happened, everything should have been back on track. Right. The Rays say that the delay will end up costing them all kinds of money because they slowed down the development, because they stopped bringing in the Heinz people, because they stopped all their, what they were going to order for construction and things like that. They said it completely upended everything. So now they were way behind, and the stadium would not open until 2029 instead of 2028. It was going to cost them more, just the inflation costs of construction would go up 10%, which on a $1.3 billion stadium could cost you $130 million. It was going to mean that they were not going to get revenues in 2028 like they thought they would from a new stadium. They were going to lose that, plus all the revenues they were losing playing temporarily outside of Tropicana Field. So that's where their anger comes from, is they felt like they had a deal and the county commission sort of went back on what everybody had agreed on. But here's where it gets sort of funky is, okay, so there was a delay. It was 49 days. Should that really cost you an entire year of construction? Right. Will it really cost you $130 or $140, $150 million more in construction costs? A lot of the people we're talking to are saying the Rays are being, they're overstating how much this is going to cost them. And the Rays have not yet shown anybody exactly what it's going to cost them. They've not put figures down on a piece of paper and said, okay, this is where we're getting this figure from. This is why it's going to cost us this much money. So now this is where you start getting into the finger pointing. And now you've got county commissioners who are criticizing the Rays, very heavily criticizing owner Stuart Sternberg, which is getting the Rays even more angry. And now it just seems like the whole thing is going to fall apart, at least in my mind, unnecessarily. It's almost like it's become a personal vendetta between everybody. And the deal is, it looks like the Rays are not going to meet the deadline of March 31st. They have to have certain things in order by March 31st in order for the deal to continue. And I don't think they're going to even try to meet that March 31st deadline. They're just going to let it lapse and see where things go from there.
Yeah, I find it because I've had Chris. I was the first person to have Chris Latvala on to hear his side, because he really was, I think, to a lot of people, like public enemy number one. And I was like, well, let's hear what he has to say too, because I think it's important to hear as much information from all the sides. And to me, one of the most frustrating things of this whole thing is the lack of transparency, as you just alluded to, from the Rays when they're talking about how much money it's going to cost. When they have, to my knowledge, an independent kind of stadium expert saying he doesn't think that it's going to be costing that much money, and they won't even be honest with the figure. I mean, think about it, John. If you're going into business with somebody and they don't want to be honest with the numbers, I mean, you got a right to feel some type of way. And Chris Lavala did reverse his vote, correct? So he was one of the guys that did reverse his vote and approve the bond. So it does seem petty, may be too strong of a word, but you eventually got what you wanted, but you're still harboring that ill will if you're the Rays and saying, I don't know if, when Stu comes out and says, well, it's, I don't know if we have the money, but I don't know if we want to spend the money. Like when you say stuff to people and you're already kind of not the most favorite owner here in Tampa Bay, like that's going to go over like a lead balloon.
Well, and there is a tremendous amount of nuance that is involved in all of this. Mm-hmm. And if you go back to when the deal was made, the Rays are very tough negotiators. Right. They've dealt with, 2 different mayors in Tampa, 3 or 4 mayors in St. Petersburg. They've not been able to get this deal done for many, many years. So they finally get it done this time. Basically it's because the way the Rays look at it is that they need more revenues. They do not make as much money as most of the other teams in Major League Baseball, so they needed to increase their revenues. That's the whole point of a new stadium. But if they have to spend $700 million to build a new stadium, that's sort of taken away from their revenues. So they have to basically make up the $700 million they're going to spend on the stadium. They have to make sure that their revenues are going to increase by an amount that exceeds that $700 million over 30 years. So that's sort of where the deal comes from. They got this deal, which they felt like was going to increase their revenues enough that it was worth making the deal. Once the hurricanes hit, once they lose the use of Tropicana Field for a year or two, once they say the delay in the bond vote cost them an extra year, is going to cost them more in construction, they now say that the revenues they were going to get is no longer going to equal the amount going out. And that's why they don't like the deal anymore. They said it was such a narrow margin that they were walking that anything that upset that deal was going to cost them money and was going to make the deal untenable for them. And that's where they are right now. Is that true? Is that accurate? I'm not saying it's not, but
we don't know. We don't know.
But they're not showing any evidence,
right.
And that's where it's getting into an issue.
Yeah, telling us that you're going to be operating at a loss over the long term. We had Stu on last year during FanFest, John, and he's like, "Yeah, with $90 million payroll, I'm going to be taking a loss on my P&L statement this year," and I'm just like, okay, you know what I mean? It's just like it's hard too, because as much as the city council has their opinion, the commission has their opinion, we have our opinion. There's also millions of people around here in the Tampa Bay area that were affected by the storm that aren't happy with the price of eggs. The last thing I want to hear is a professional sports owner complaining about taking a loss on his P&L statement when your payroll is less than half of the people at the top, right? So I mean, he's not. The Rays, we'll put Stu and the Rays together in this example. They're not doing themselves any favors here, are they, John? Because for all the people that have, given them the benefit of the doubt, they love them regardless. The people that are on the periphery, the people that can kind of take it or leave it, are ambivalent about the team. This certainly doesn't help. And if they build a new stadium, where's the good faith, right? This. You've been at Amalie Arena. Like, there's people that don't know the difference between, a blue chip prospect and the blue line, but they go to the Lightning game. They don't care. They don't even think about it. They hand over their credit card because they know they're going to have a good time and it's a great experience. I just fear, regardless if this gets done or not, there could be some irreparable damage between the team and this community. Do you agree with that sentiment?
Oh, absolutely. If they let that March 31st deadline pass and effectively kill the deal, I just don't see any way that anybody in Tampa Bay, whether it's Pinellas or Hillsborough, St. Pete or Tampa, I just don't see anybody putting the money up for another stadium for Stu Sternberg. They may put it up for a different owner, and that's often how these things happen in Major League Baseball. It takes one owner who ends up becoming the bad guy. And once they sell, the new owner comes in, like riding the white horse.
The White Knight.
And
Yep.
yeah. And, that then they get the stadium built. And that may be the direction we're going here. And I agree. I think the Rays, from a PR standpoint, I just don't know that they've handled it very well because they're just very secretive. They're very tight with information. And it doesn't help when you're trying to get politicians and voters and fans on your side to sort of keep them out of the loop. And they've certainly kept people out of the loop for the last 2 months. Once the county commission approved the bonds. And to me, this is all, it's very sad because you could make the argument that Stuart Sternberg and the Rays have held their end of the bargain in terms of providing a Major League Baseball quality experience for the past 18 years. They've done much better than Tampa Bay fans have done in terms of supporting the Rays. Since 2008, the Rays have the third best record in Major League Baseball. It's the Yankees, the Dodgers, the Rays. That's ridiculous, for a small market team to be up there with the Yankees and Dodgers in terms of winning. And yet during that entire time, the Rays are like 28th in attendance. So they're not getting the support that teams like the Yankees and the Dodgers normally get when you win as much as they're winning. So from that standpoint, the Rays feel like they've held up their end of the bargain, and Tampa Bay has sort of lagged behind in terms of attendance. And whenever I say this, I don't want to point the finger at fans because to me, it's not the fans' fault. Tickets are expensive, Life is expensive. If you don't want to spend money to go to a Bucks game, to go to a Rays game, to go to a Lightning game, I am not going to criticize you. That's your decision. You have to, handle your own household budget the way you see fit. The problem is more as a marketplace. Does Tampa Bay have the wherewithal in terms of corporations who are buying season tickets and buying suites and sponsorships and things like that? That's where most of the money comes from in major league markets. I was told many years ago that the way season tickets are sold in most markets for Major League Baseball, 2/3 of your season tickets are bought by corporations, 1/3 by your everyday fans. In Tampa Bay, it was flip-flopped. Wow. It was 1/3 was corporation and 2/3 were fans, which meant that the Rays were having to sell, individual tickets on a game-by-game basis, and that's hard to do business that way. So for a lot of reasons, this marketplace, whether it's, the lack of, Fortune 500 corporations, whether it's too many retired people on fixed incomes, whether it's, our major industry is tourism, which is generally lower paying jobs than, in a service industry than, you look at Atlanta with Home Depot and Delta and CNN and, all these different major corporations. We just don't have that in Tampa Bay. So there's not enough money here. So I'm sort of going off on this tangent.
No, it's a great, I'm glad you brought that up because,
but the point is the Rays have been great corporate partners for a long time. And I think they're just sort of pissing it all away with the way things have gone the last 6 months.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, and I'm glad you went on that tangent because people ask me a lot about that because I grew up in New York. I went to Yankee games religiously. I went to Mets games. My household was split right down the middle. Dad's side, Yankee fans, mom's side, Met fans, Jets, Giants. I had to know what family I was around to not cheer too loud or too little. And then I coached baseball. So I coached baseball for 10 years before I got into radio. Every age, high school ball, traveling all around the country. And I saw tens and hundreds of thousands of kids on baseball fields every single weekend, John, here in the state of Florida. So this is a baseball hotbed. I mean, you look at the major leaguers that, the Pete Alonsos and the Kyle Tuckers of the world, right? I wonder, people ask me my opinion about the attendance, and I'd love to have this conversation with you. I always say that it's not the quality of issues, I think it's the quantity of issues, right? It's because the payroll, it's because people don't like Stu, it's because there's other things you could spend your money on, because people want to be outside and go to the beach. There's just a lot to it. And that conversation is kind of taken that next step now because of the argument that you just made about the record. Now, instead of the Rays looking at it and going, well, our record's great, how come they don't take that next step and go, well, all right, well, maybe it's more than just winning on the baseball field? Because obviously we saw a couple of years ago in the playoffs, it didn't matter. The game didn't sell out. So if it's not just that, if your big selling point to your team isn't just the product on the field, I think the Rays have been short-sighted in not trying to look at other ways to try to get more people invested and keeping their guys around. Because you and I both know nobody's going to buy a jersey for the Rays because they know it's one of those things where the guy's not going to be here in 2 or 3 years. So if the team itself doesn't have staying power, how are corporations going to invest in a product where they don't trust the players, they don't trust the manager, they don't trust the owner, or they don't trust the players that are going to be here, they don't trust the owner? That kind of stuff, unfortunately, supersedes what the product is on the field. I know it's unlike maybe other markets, but I feel like the Rays haven't really looked at everything to try to get more people in the building, because it's worked at times, but not on a consistent enough basis.
That's an excellent point. And I hear that all the time, that, you just when you fall in love with a player, they're sending them somewhere else. Unfortunately, it's sort of this chicken and egg kind of thing. Yeah. That's how the Rays continue to win, right? Is they don't lock themselves into these long-term contracts that end up being an albatross around their neck. They do it with younger players. They keep the younger players while they're still under control and their salaries are somewhat manageable, and that's how they win. So if they end up signing, whatever play, pick whatever bad contract you want to come up with in Major League Baseball.
Anthony Rendon.
Yeah. If the Rays had signed Anthony Rendon, they would be in last place for the next 5 years, right? Because too much of their payroll is devoted to one guy who's no longer helping them. And they can't, that's not the way they win. They can only win with, versatility and, having players who do certain things well and are complemented by other players on the roster, and using all 26 men on the roster. That's their formula to win. And the fact that they're not drawing people even while winning, that becomes a problem then, because right. then they can't go out and invest in those other players, those big ticket players. And then they have to trade Blake Snell, and they have to trade James Shields and whoever else over the years that they've traded, because they can no longer afford them. So, and I think that to some degree we were talking about their anger. I think that plays a part in it as well, that, the Rays are like, would you rather us be Pittsburgh or Cincinnati or, one of these other low revenue markets that never wins? Maybe they keep their players around, but they don't win. We're putting a winner on the field and they're still not showing up. That's a problem. It's a market-wide problem. It's a franchise problem. And, to sort of argue against what I've just been talking about, Stu was able to buy this team back in 2005 for all of these very reasons.
Right.
Stu is not a multi-billionaire. He doesn't have Steve Cohen money. He doesn't have, Steinbrenner money, whoever else you want to say. He's obviously a wealthy man, but he was able to afford this franchise because this franchise did not have a very high value because they weren't drawn. It wasn't a healthy franchise. So he was able to buy this franchise. The team is now worth, 10 times what he paid for it in 2005. So he's made his money back in some ways, but the only way he can actually cash in on that is by selling the team. Right. He's not making enough money year to year to make those investments in players worth it. Once he sells the team, then, it's not a problem for him. And unfortunately, I think that's where we're headed. I don't think it's going to happen in the next 3 to 6 months, but sometime in the next 2 to 4 years, I do think he'll end up selling the franchise. And that's basically the way it's going to survive in Tampa Bay. Because, as I said, I don't think any politician is going to stick their neck out to give him $700, $800 million to build a stadium any longer.
So I think that's kind of what we've been saying. It's ironic because when I had Chris Zavala on, he said the same thing pretty much. It's like the only way, and we can all discuss the different ways to get there, who is right, who is wrong, who's transparent, who's not telling the whole truth. But it seems like there's consensus from multiple sides that this eventually just all ends with Stu selling the team. You agree with that?
Yeah, I think that's the direction we're heading. I don't think he's in any hurry to do it now. It's almost kind of strange in that, Major League Baseball, the commissioner Rob Manfred has made it clear he thinks Tampa Bay is a major league market and he wants a team here. So he sort of forced the team's hand to say, you've got to get Tropicana Field fixed because you need a permanent place to play, at least for the next 3 to 4 years. You can't, be this vagabond team going from spring training field to spring training field. So by doing that, he sort of gave the Rays, a longer runway here. They now have several years. If once Tropicana Field gets fixed, the lease goes through 2028. So they now have time to sort of decide, okay, we're not going to sell it at a bargain. We're going to get as much money as we can selling this team. And hey, meanwhile, we've still got a pretty good roster. We've got a chance at winning a pennant here. So why not, enjoy the next 2 or 3 years while we look for sellers and see how many ball games we can win. I think that's the place that they're in right now.
It's funny you said vagabonds. That got me thinking about Can You Feel the Love Tonight from Elton John. Kings and vagabonds. Because I feel like that's kind of the story of this whole Rays team. It doesn't matter if they're kings on the field. There might be vagabonds traveling from field to field here in the Bay Area. John, this has been such a pleasant conversation. Thank you so much, man. Keep up the fantastic work. I tell people all the time, everybody over there at the Tampa Bay Times does such a great job. And to support local, subscribe to the Tampa Bay Times today. Make sure you go to tampabay.com/sports. And again, supporting local is the most important thing. With me no longer at iHeart doing this thing, I've had a ton of support and a ton of your colleagues there at the Times joining me. So yeah, we gotta do this all for each other. So appreciate your time. Thank you very much, man, for making our show a whole hell of a lot smarter. Have a great rest of your week, man. I'll see you around soon.
All right. Thanks a lot, Jay.
You got it, man.